fun. I thought we were all coming out at the same time. It's nothing like doing this. And then, so Gillian, Hussam, Nina, and Ravi. All right. Last session of the day. Everybody hot? Everybody ready for another beer? You guys want to all say hello and introduce yourselves?
I'm Gillian McCrae. I'm based in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and I'm the venture manager for Creative Destruction Lab.
I'm Hussam. I run the core operation at DMZ, based out of Toronto, and we are a tech accelerator that helps founders build global powerhouses.
Hey, I'm Nina Stepanov. I'm a principal at Acceleprise. We're a pre-seed B2B SaaS accelerator based in San Francisco and in New York. We're launching in Toronto in January, though, so come talk to me if you want to.
And I'm Ravi Belani. I'm the managing director of Alchemist. Alchemist is an accelerator based in San Francisco that focuses on enterprise startups. We run a 6-month program focused on technical founders.
Awesome. So we're here to talk about what accelerators are after. And I'm assuming that entails many of you who are in the audience. How many people are looking to go to an accelerator?
Yay.
You happen to be in the right place. I've got 4 of them. But what I thought maybe we would start with, why don't we talk about who doesn't do well in an accelerator? So Nina, what company?
Is it because we had this conversation in the green room?
That's exactly why we're doing this.
All right. Well, so I joked that in preparing for this talk, I was thinking of all the very specific minutia of things that you should do, because there are actually things that you should do rather than just getting up here and being like, you should be a scrappy founder, because that's kind of useless. So I think some of the things that you shouldn't do, and I'll just say a couple because I would obviously love to hear everyone else up here talk. So there's the pre-process, and then there's the once you've gotten into the program process, and they're 2 very different things, right? The sort of the dog and pony show that you put on at the beginning before you get accepted is really important, and maybe it sounds arbitrary, but it is super important to put on sort of that good show in a sense because it's a sales process. So things not to do, like don't be late for your call. If it's a video call, be prepared to be on video. These things sound kind of silly or stupid, but you'd be surprised. I think there was a guy who one time took a call like in the grocery store while walking through the aisles, and I was like, I get it. You think you're hot shit, but I don't know you, and this is weird. So just being professional and understanding that in the same way that you're trying to sell a client or a customer, you're also sort of selling the VC on you and what you're building and what you're doing. And part of that process is convincing me that this is how you're going to act for every introduction that I then make for you, which is like 90% of my job. So just showing up. And it sounds arbitrary, but it is really important. And then post-program, kind of in the same vein, because I'll just keep it related, when it comes to introductions. So I know it seems like we are a fountain of endless introductions, which we are. That's our job, again, in many instances. But we also spend sort of day in and day out managing these relationships. These are really important people frequently to us. And you'd kind of be surprised, like if you have a bad experience, let's say I make an introduction to like a mentor or someone, and you're like, this isn't really my person. I don't like them that much. It's still a relationship that I want to sustain and keep in my book for future people that might like that person. And so doing your best to kind of keep composure and be respectful and sort of like say the follow-up thank yous and do all these different things. Again, really managing all of these different relationships as if they are a sales process and remembering kind of who is involved in that world. Because at the end of the day, this ecosystem is relatively small. We all know each other. We all sort of talk and discuss, how did that meeting go? How did they act? Were they speaking clearly or whatever it is that they were just kind of being measured on? And then we use that to make further intros and kind of also ideally further invest in you as a founder. So just really putting your best foot forward day in and day out for the duration of the program, whether it's a month long or 6 months long. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Did I just blow your mind? Is that
That's actually probably not that difficult, given how little my mind is.
We're just trying to keep you guys entertained for this last hour.
It's hot. It's funny because when we talk about accelerators and we look to success. So how do you identify who's going to be successful in your accelerator before they get in? Ravi?
It's very hard to predict. I should say that at first. So the first thing is, how do you define success as a founder, and think about what success is going to be for you in terms of why you're going into an accelerator. The easy things to measure aren't necessarily the things that are actually the most important. So one of the things that's easy to measure is, do you fundraise? Within Alchemist, we say you get 1 point for fundraising, you get 10 points for landing a first customer, and 100 points for developing a scalable and repeatable business model. But because fundraising is so measurable, it's something that you can count points against. We were fortunate enough to be rated number 1 in 2016 in terms of the median raises of our grads. Y Combinator was number 2, according to CB Insights. But if you looked at our companies that raised money, like Launch Darkly raised $76 million. We had a quantum computing company called Rigetti, which raised $120 million. All of them had classic red flags that would be indicators that they would not be successful. Rigetti was a solo founder, and many people will say, oh, you have to have co-founding teams. Launch Darkly did incredibly mediocrely at our demo day, and was led by an incredibly uncharismatic, a self-professed uncharismatic CEO. Who went on then to raise $76 million because she built an amazing product. Statistically, the quick answer to the question is, in my experience, the biggest indicator of success has nothing to do with intelligence or charisma, and has everything to do with determination, resilience. Do you get up when you get knocked down? And can you just approach things mechanically in terms of just lining up a lot of things to do and just being persistent? Persistence beats out intelligence or charisma any day for me, followed by uniqueness. Competence is sort of a commodity. So building the next AI chatbot is not going to be, it's going to be more difficult than doing something that's crazy that nobody else is doing. So, the way that I would have answered that first question for us is, the classic flaw is if we get an applicant who wants to be a founder, and we say, why are you doing this company? And they say, oh, I've always wanted to be a founder. That is a big red flag for us. We're looking for you to be starting a company that only you are uniquely designed to do, not because you love Tim Ferriss and you want to have a 4-hour work week. Okay? And I would say that that's also going to be your advantage when it comes to success in fundraising, in getting talent to work for you, and customers to buy from you. If you're the only game in town, it makes it easier for a VC to diligence. You'll attract talent that's galvanized by your mission, and there'll be shorter sales cycles because there's less competition. So do the weird thing. When we funded Rigetti, which is a quantum computing company, everybody said, quantum computing? That's a science project. That's not going to exist for 2 or 3 years, or 5 or 10 years. Lo and behold, it shifted. We just funded a company that's taking shrimp shells and making compost out of shrimp shells, so you can create surfboards and things like that. There's no other company in the world that's doing that. Okay, and so that uniqueness, I think, is a real differentiating predictor of success.
I couldn't agree more, by the way, if I'm allowed to elaborate. But usually and we always talk about this when we assess companies. We look at obviously a lot of the factors that were mentioned by Ravi, but we look for effort. Effort is very important, and assessing effort is very subjective. We don't write checks. I personally believe that funding raised is a vanity metric. It's great. Our company's raised around $700 million to date, which shows that we've done something right. But it does not necessarily determine, that a founder has succeeded. Usually, the number one thing that we really care about is effort. Are you actually really putting the effort to build a company, and a great company, or do you believe that you're entitled to everything that we give you, at the DMZ or at any accelerator that you work with? And to be completely honest, and to answer your first question, this is what I would advise a founder not to do, is to walk into an accelerator because they've been through, today chances are, if you interview really well, if you got your deck, really well polished, if you do a really good pitch, and if you basically answer all the questions right, and if you have a really good product at the stage that you're being interviewed at, chances are you'll make it to the accelerator, you'll probably get the investment. But the number one mistake, don't walk in believing that you made it to the major leagues. Don't walk in believing that you basically are entitled to get a lot of things because you're in. It doesn't work like that. That's when it starts, or at least that's when it starts at the DMZ. We expect you to come in, day out, put 100% effort and hustle every day. So.
Can I also throw one more thing onto, like, you talked about persistence. That's something too, it's hard to admit this because I don't want every single person that we reject to then persist, but there have absolutely been instances where we'll reject a founder and they will follow back up and answer to, because we always say exactly why we're rejecting, because that's important and you should expect that and you should ask for that. But there have been founders who followed up and addressed those things, and it doesn't happen frequently, but it does happen that we'll turn back around and we'll say, okay, yeah, great point, and we'd love to work with you. And then sometimes, frequently, those end up being the founders that do truly work so hard day in, day out. They take nothing for granted. They take every single introduction. They do everything they're supposed to do to build their business. And the persistence bit is definitely important in sales and in fundraising.
I'm going to chime in on an application process that I've noticed in a few of my roles is that it's the founders that are able to write about what they've done, not about them trying to sell their business. So you've got limited resources, whether you've got just early stage funding, no funding at all, you're bootstrapping, or you're just putting a team around, like, be able to quantify what you've done to date. It makes a huge impact when you're reading through it versus just trying to sell us on your company.
Tell me a little bit about this balance between execution and outcomes and how that plays in to because many of the companies haven't done anything yet before they get in. So how do you find this balance between we haven't done enough and we've done $1 million in top line sales?
We haven't done enough, but we have $1 million in top line sales.
No.
Well,
No.
I'm just wondering, but I can go with this. Like, I think execution, you're always measuring yourself against what you're creating for yourself, whether it's a KPI, if it's the one metric that's driving your business, that's driving other decisions within your business. You're holding yourself accountable. Nobody else is really, either you're going to succeed or fail in the company that you grow. If it's $1 million in ARR, if you're scaling that to $10 million, but it's about putting the right processes and team around you in order to make it happen.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
We have a saying at Alchemist, and I'm going to use accelerators with investors in the saying that investors trump founders. That means that even if you're right, if an investor just doesn't believe you, it doesn't matter. Even if you say 2 + 2 = 4, and an investor says, no, I think it equals 3, the investor wins. But what trumps investors is customers or traction. And so you need to have traction if the investors don't believe in you. So to answer that question, if you present a market that is compelling, and this is a much longer lecture on what makes a market compelling, you don't need traction. So if you present something that either is a thesis that is emerging in the zeitgeist of Silicon Valley, like people are looking for that thing, and you have crystallized that and articulated that in a compelling way. And what compelling means is you have to have a long-term vision of what this becomes and a short-term wedge that you're going to initially attack in a strategic way to get to that long-term vision. With a team that we believe in, you don't need any traction. And frankly, you don't need any traction to do your institutional fundraise either. You can close big money without traction. If you don't have that well articulated, then traction suddenly becomes important. But we're now admitting class 23. In all of our 22 classes that we've graduated to date, not one of them had the highest traction company have the highest raise. In fact, usually the highest raise came from the companies that were in the bottom quartile of traction.
Yes.
Is it a factor if the presenter coming to you has a burning desire to very moral proposals, and they're able to come across with that? Within that, they're able to inspire others around them to master the craft. That's something that stands out if you answer all the right questions, if your dev is sound.
If it's a necessary but insufficient condition for us. If what you're saying maps to a thesis that we believe in, then it's a necessary condition. We want a passionate founder. But if what you're saying doesn't map to something that we believe in, if you're like, I'm really passionate about AI chatbots, I don't care how passionate you are, you're the 1,000th AI chatbot I've seen, and you don't have to believe me. I would say go out and prove me wrong. Yeah.
Well, but this is also where like things like go-to-market strategy really kind of differentiate you. So if you come into the we call ourselves pre-seed, but we're actually just after sort of product launch, and you need to start selling aggressively. And frequently, we do have a lot of companies that come to us that are pitching a business that exists tenfold. But if you, in your passion of building your business, have figured out a really unique and interesting way to approach it, that's meaningful. I mean, when you come to terms with the fact that a lot of accelerator success comes from acquisitions, you don't have to necessarily become, the next big. I mean, unicorns are plentiful nowadays, but whatever we're calling them nowadays, you don't have to become that. But building a really strong business, to your point, that is sustainable, that has strong traction, and getting acquired is very meaningful and it is important. And go to market helps with that quite a bit.
Please go ahead.
I was just going to say, keep in mind, whether it's an interviewing process or an application, you're being compared to everybody else, right? So if everyone else is hitting off all the check boxes, you got to be competitive enough to fill in those check boxes for your own company.
I couldn't agree more on all of the above. And I want to give context, and this is not a sales pitch, but DMZ, just for context, we take zero equity, and we work with companies anywhere from the pre-seed stage all the way to basically getting you ready for a Series A. Our flagship program is a sales execution focused accelerator. So everything we do with you in that accelerator is basically help you build a growth playbook for your business. And a lot of that is done directly with actual industry practitioners and experts like April Dunford, who just presented in the room next to us and just launched her book, Obviously Awesome. So people that really understand what it means to actually help you build a legitimate scalable, repeatable recipe for your business. So that's what the accelerator is focused on. Earlier stages are usually, for companies that are not at that stage yet, but we actually want to prepare them for that stage. So chances are, if you're anywhere in between from basically idea on the back of a napkin to doing that, we can probably help you. But that's really what it boils down to. The question that we always ask ourselves, can we actually help them? And that's how we really, in essence, we look for great founders that are going after big markets. And the way we assess that is different, but the way your effort shows is not necessarily something that you show in a pitch. It could be in what you've done to date in terms of validating, how are you basically, selling to customers, or how are you, going after figuring out product market fit. It really depends on the stage, but your effort doesn't necessarily show from just your presentation and your deck. So, yeah.
Two quick ones. How much do you value IP, first of all? And secondly, do you ever look at pitch decks, or do you go straight to a conversation?
IP for Creative Destruction Lab is one of those check boxes. We need something that's defensible, deep tech, science related. Proprietary technology obviously is what we start to filter through when we're looking at applicants. That's important to us because what's going to set you apart, and how's your tech going to be defensible?
I think IP is extremely important, but IP is not everything. For us, and we've come across a lot of companies that their IPs and their patents, or their patents to be, if they were to file for patents, are as good as how well they can defend them and how much they can afford or whether they can afford defending them or not. So I think it depends. The answer to this question is always it depends, and depends on the company and nature of what you're building. And your second question was on pitch decks, right?
Do you look at them ever, or do you go straight to like a standard application, or just to a conversation?
So we actually do look at pitch decks, and we do have a standard application that we go through. So in short, we look at both. But if you want to learn more about how we do it, I'm happy to talk about it.
Yeah, ditto on the first question. Literally could not have said it better myself. As for pitch decks, do you mean if you emailed me directly with a pitch deck, would I just immediately respond and be like, here's the application? It depends, because I looked at your deck. So I answer all of my emails, and I look at pretty much every single attachment. So I'll most likely skim it. If you send me like a 30-page deck, I'm probably not going to look at every single slide. But if within the first 2 or 3, sort of meaty slides, there's something in there that I'm like, oh, this is pretty cool. Or if ideally it's like a 1-pager or something where I can look at it pretty quickly and see okay, this is where the traction is. This is like what we tell teams always when I'm working on the lookbook right now for our current cohort. It's what's the quick one-liner about what you're doing? Why are you doing this? Like, what's the problem that you're solving for? What's the market opportunity? Where is your traction? And what is your team structure? And if you can hit those things, it doesn't have to be a 16-slide deck. It can just be one page. It's baffling, I know, but it's possible. I'll definitely look at that. And then sometimes I'll still route you to the application, which is kind of a nod to like, maybe I'm not that into it, but I'm, a part of a team of 7, so someone might. And if I take the call, then that's a really good sign. And at that point, it's just kind of, running with it.
Make sure there's continuity. If you're going to send a deck and fill out an application, that it's the same story, it's the same financials, it's the same, or else there's going to be more question marks than what you want.
For us, quickly on the IP, on the IP that we, it's hard to give a quick answer for such a complicated subject. It depends on the domain. So if you're doing a biotech company or pharmaceutical, the IP is critical. For software, patents are generally viewed as roadblocks, not as, or not roadblocks, but speed bumps, as opposed to something that's generally defensible. The broader issue is competitive advantage. And when you think about articulating competitive advantage, think about a near-term advantage and a long-term advantage. The near term, if you're doing an IP-based advantage, needs to be a 10x advantage. If it's 2 to 3x, Moore's Law will catch up to you in 18 months. And so you have to be 10x better, faster, cheaper for that to count for us. But then actually in the long run, we're looking for defensibility that's not contingent upon technology, ideally, where you have some network effect or something where you can answer the question, if you prove out a market and 1,000 people copycat you, why are you still going to win? So we're looking for that answer. Okay.
I presume that you mean patent pending versus, so patent granted versus patent pending. Patent pending doesn't mean much. There's no guarantee you're going to get it.
Even granted.
Or even you have a lawyer lined up. You have, for legal reasons, you can't file the patent at this time, but you can file later. You even look at that. Or
Well, even in software, a granted patent is going to still, I would argue, be viewed as a speed bump, not as a moat. Because people can violate your patents all the time, and it happens all the time in big companies, and it just becomes, everybody has their own patent war chest. They'll say, you're violating our patent, so we're going to violate yours. And so unless it's some deep algorithmic play, I find that rarely that will be enough for software.
I feel like it's generally, obvious is an aggressive word to use because we see so much of it, but it's generally pretty clear when a patent is truly going to make a difference for a business, whereas when it's going to be something like a roadblock. And again, that's also not I think sometimes founders feel uncomfortable asking questions that seem like they put them in a position of like lack of power in the conversation. So saying something like, is having a patent in this business something that is important? I mean, our job, like I think we kind of know that founders that come to us are typically not necessarily, they don't have all the answers. We have some of them. And so asking these types of questions up front also just makes you look better. It means you're asking the right questions that we want to hear you asking. So something like a patent is a pretty good one. Like, should we be wasting our time on filing and trying to get a patent or not? It's a good one.
and you always expect folks to give you the full pitch deck up front versus doing a quick call to actually show you the pitch deck and explain it as you're going along. Or I'm just.
I could, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, can you ask the question?
So I mean, I do most as far as angels and accelerators. Most folks they want to see up front the pitch deck. Like I want to see everything. Like as opposed to you getting the complete feel of what the entrepreneur is really. They can answer the questions off. You have questions. They can answer those questions as you're going through that pitch deck. So I guess I was hoping like, oh, you give me a compelling. Elevator pitch, and now, okay, let's have a meeting, and I go through the pitch deck with you, kind of situation. Is that something that is?
We just care about you can give us the pitch deck for if you want up front, but we just need you to answer a couple basic questions. Really, we're going to look at the team, why now, and just those are the two critical questions for us, and then. Everything else is sort of extra, and then we'll invite you in for an interview.
Okay,
and then you'll walk through your pitch deck with us.
So on the pitch deck piece, on our application, it's optional. Like you don't have to actually upload a pitch deck. I'd like to say our questions are basic. We do have a little bit more than a couple of questions, but in general, they're basic in nature. And our team would typically, even if you had started an application and you didn't complete it, they'd reach out and say, hey, would you like to complete your application? But in essence, we do usually at least do a screening phone call just to make sure that the applicant didn't miss anything that they really wanted to actually present an application, but they couldn't in the questions. And then there is an in-person pitch. So the commitment increases as the application gets a little bit more serious. So this way, it's the best use of your time and our time at every stage of the process, if that makes sense.
I'll just add last thing I'll add to that too. If it just left my mind. Oh yeah, I would highly suggest reaching out to founders who've gone through accelerators and just ask them about the process, the interview process especially. Obviously, it's helpful to come from us, but we sit on the wrong side of the table in essence, right? You'd be surprised. Our founders our community is one of the best parts of Acceleprise, and the founders, I know for a fact that they are more than happy to be helpful to other promising founders. So if you're respectful in your outreach and just like, if there's a program that you really want to be a part of, just find a founder either who recently went through it or who has had follow-on investments from the accelerator, and just ask them like, what was the process like, or if they're willing to review your deck even, or even just hear your pitch. I mean, that's much more obviously of their time, but just getting some input, it is very helpful. I mean, we can say the same words, but I think it means something different when it comes from someone else who sits on your side of the table.
There are a number of different accelerators, incubators out there that all have different structures in terms of equity, no equity, investment, all that kind of stuff. How do you suggest that new founders go about selecting which ones are the right fit for them, if they're the right fit for an accelerator at all?
That's a whole other hour-long talk.
Yeah.
I have time.
Well, it starts with Google. But honestly, you can get a lot of information about the type of programming, what's specific to the streams or the industries that the accelerators are focusing on. Like, that's part of your background too, because when you're comparing what programs you want to go to, you kind of want to come up with reasons as to why I'm choosing this one over that one, right? It actually makes your conversation better with that accelerator if you get granted through that interview process. Equity versus no equity. Ours has been run on philanthropy, give back, and then just more recently, government, federal, and provincial support for our program. So we do it for free. But at the same time, it's not free. It costs a lot of money to run this program, and that's why it's so important to us to find really good companies to go through it, because of the stakeholders that are involved, that commit their time in working with founders. That's a huge piece to it too. But you look at companies that take equity, and there's a reason, and it's a model that works for them, and then talk to their alumni to see if it was worth what they did, I would say.
Yeah, very well said, Gillian. And we come from a similar space because we're also non-equity based accelerator. And a lot of times founders may have the perception that if you're not equity and you're government supported, then you should accept everybody. Well, it's definitely not the case. I think when you're government supported, or where you're indirectly government supported or publicly backed in a way or another, it becomes a lot tougher for you to select who can benefit most from the funding. And that's why it really boils down to the question of what is it that you're trying to achieve at your time at the DMZ or the other accelerator. If you're trying to build your growth playbook, we believe we can help you with that. Other accelerators are focused on helping you commercialize deep tech. And then once you get into the market development play, we can help you. So, I think if you really look deep into what every accelerator offers, and I agree with Gillian, it starts with a Google search, you can find a lot of information on what offers or who offers what. And obviously, the check is a very big piece. We don't write checks, for example. Other accelerators do. So that's something to keep in mind for sure.
I feel like we make it a little bit easier because we're focused on a specific industry. So we are B2B SaaS, they're enterprise tech. There's a handful of different kinds of programs, obviously, that have a focus. Something that I don't think most founders actually are aware, or they don't think about, is what environment they are best suited for to learn. So I've had founders who've gone through YC with the company and then have also gone through our program, and they're like, YC is a lot. Like there's a lot of people there and it's a lot of companies and you don't get that much attention, but you get the network and you get all this amazing stuff. And then, Acceleprise is 8 to 10 companies per program. It's longer, it's more hands-on. Some people learn better in different environments. And some people also only need certain things, right? So I think you have to look at yourself and be a little bit more intentional about saying, what does this company need right now? What do I, as a founder, what is my crutch, or what is the area that I'm not super strong in, and what program can fulfill that need? Again, this is another great reason to talk to founders who've gone through those programs, which I highly suggest doing. It's so important. And asking them, what was the biggest value add? Generally speaking, they'll all say somewhat of the same thing, because that's really the core competency sort of that program, right? So we're hyper-focused on sales, go-to-market, and fundraising. That's what we're really good at, and that's what we try to do. We're not really product people. There's certain things that we just don't focus on. And so if you have a gap in that world and you work best in structured, smaller group environments where you get a lot of one-on-one time, then it sounds like you should work with us. But if not, then there's other programs, right, that fulfill that need. I think one of the interesting stories is one of our LPs, Ryan Peterson from Flexport, he went through Y Combinator not because he needed an accelerator model, but he needed the network, and he knew how important that was to build the business that he wanted to build. And he talks about that relatively openly. So something, again, there's all these different models of different types of people and how they work best. So consider.
I would approach it like college or venture capital, which is at this stage, you don't need to decide one. Apply to as many as you can. That you can realistically do. I mean, you can do some pretty crude cuts, but do that one, because even if you have one that you just want to get into, if you have multiple offers, you can actually negotiate for a better outcome or for a better offer with certain accelerators. And the very process of applying can be helpful for your business if the applications are structured correctly. You can start to answer some key questions and get a lot of feedback in a relatively short amount of time. So I would apply to as many as you realistically can within a short time frame. I mean, obviously don't apply to everyone, but I would think about it like college or fundraising. And then once you get accepted, then the key thing is don't listen to any of us. Talk to the founders that went through those programs, because the founders are going to be honest with you. Even when you're fundraising, all the VCs will have these big brands. Don't get bedazzled by the brands of the VCs. Talk to the founders that they have funded and ask them for introductions. And one, you'll build out your network that way. So even if you don't join that accelerator, you'll have met 2 or 3 other founders that can become peer coaches for you. And 2, then you can be a lot more specific about and you'll learn about what accelerators are just by going through that process too.
On that really good point is that sometimes peers that are maybe 2 or 3 or 4 years ahead of where you are today are the best mentors that you could ask for at this stage.
Absolutely. And as a matter of fact, we just recently started an alumni and residence program just because of that fact, because we realized that they could really be the best coaches and mentors that you can benefit from while being at the DMZ. I couldn't agree more.
Question over here. So the awesome country of Canada has a startup visa program where letters of support and successful placement from incubators or accelerators can be used to fast-track permanent residency, not only for the founders, but for their families sometimes. Can you speak about the number of founders that get in this way, and what are the challenges uniquely to this pathway?
CDL is part of the startup visa program. I'm based in Atlantic Canada. There's a lot of incubators that participate in that program as well. I haven't directly touched on it, but we had one company this year whose family had moved here. Again, it kind of goes back to that social capital piece. It's building that relationship with that institution, that organization, follow through, follow up, talk to immigrants that have now landed in Canada, find out how that experience has been for them, if you find that helpful.
I'm guessing not many people come this way. Can you speak about the numbers of how many founders?
I don't have numbers myself.
We backed a company called PazRight that helps foreign, especially engineering talent, find its way into the U.S., particularly into the tech industry. So I learned more about how much of a mess that world is and how unfair it is. We get a lot of founders who also apply who are from overseas or from outside of the country, and it's definitely a difficult process that candidly we don't get incredibly involved in. Like now that we have PazRight, actually we try to help them work together. So I don't know specifically about this Canadian program, and I'm excited for someone on this panel to know something about it. But we don't, I guess the good point to make here is that we don't turn founders away because they're not US citizens. And I would be skeptical of a program that does. I don't think it impedes the program in any capacity. I think you can still be a part of it. And also typically we're longer in that we're 4 months, but a lot of programs are 3 months long. And so you actually end up being within the window of time that you need to be to, I think it's 90 days typically that you get like visas for to do that kind of travel. When coming also from Canada and participating in sort of the U.S. ecosystem and environment, you don't have to live in the U.S. to sell in the U.S. to be successful in the U.S. I mean, there's a lot of companies that can do that. That's one of the reasons we're launching in Toronto is so that we can do that more efficiently without having to have founders move or sort of change their citizenship or anything like that. So I guess maybe that's a deeper question, but I don't think that you have to go that route to be a successful business based in Canada but operating in the U.S.
I just want to make sure I understood your question about Startup Visa precisely. Was it about the challenges or about the numbers of?
So I kind of know the numbers are low, and kind of want to get into the challenges of why, and maybe are there things that can be done to increase those numbers? Because really, you tap into a market of founders that are overseas.
The challenges of why the numbers of startup visas issued are low, or okay. So I'll be as frank as possible. From our perspective. So startup visa was actually announced, at the DMZ as a permanent program. So we're very well aware of it. And I was sitting on the committee that used to designate entities to become part of the startup visa program. So from a DMZ perspective, we receive numerous applications. So I would say, possibly in the hundreds. I'm not going to give you any specific numbers right now because I don't want to, provide any inaccurate information. But the biggest challenge we have is just basically the fit to the criteria that we have. We've been extremely picky. We've only accepted and processed 2 applications to date. And from our perspective, we thought we'd give it a try and we'd see how the processing time for the applications go. And, so far, it's been interesting. The process is taking longer than we thought. From an incubator or from an approved designated entity perspective, all you have to do is write a letter of support. And then the rest is handled by Citizenship Immigration Canada. So we've done that part from our end, but to date we've only extended 2. And to be completely honest, it's just the quality of the applications that you get is very important. And you have to keep in mind that because we're in the great country of Canada and because it gives us such an opportunity to actually extend such in my opinion a very rare opportunity. For a company or founders to actually completely move here, we have to understand the responsibility that comes with that. Because as soon as they actually get accepted and move their company, they're also permanent residents and they have full, immigration and citizenship rights. So we have to do our extreme due diligence and make sure that the company is actually going to come and incorporate and be part of sort of the bigger mandate we have, which is creating great companies that are made in Canada. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
All the way in the back.
The question was, as a solo founder, do you have any advice when you're applying to address the question, you're a solo founder? I think that was the effective question. So my answer to that, and to any question that you think is a liability, turn it around as an asset. And so, as a solo founder, you actually have a competitive advantage. Well, so this is, I'm trying to answer your advice as an advisor. I've got 2 hats. And then I'm also, on the screening committee of Alchemist, and we have a strong The reason why we like co-founding teams is because it's hard to start a company, okay? When you're low and if your co-founder is high, it'll carry you through difficult times. And it also evidences the fact that other people will join you, that you're mission-driven. So we want to see evidences that people will join you not for cash, but because they care either about you or the mission of your business. So it's sort of the first elemental step of entrepreneurship. It's also the first come-to-Jesus moment for you that this is real. If you have to ask ask somebody else to join you and sacrifice their professional life with you, then it really means that you've done a lot of hard soul searching. Having said that, every coin has two sides. The advantage of being a solo founder is you have more equity that you can give your founding employees than a duo co-founding team would have. And so if you flip that around and say, you know what, I'm not a solo founder. I'm actually thinking about getting 10 co-founders as my first hires, and I want to compensate them all better than a first hire. That's another way to flip it. Or if you create sort of a detailed plan about how you're going to mitigate the concerns that I have, then I might join you as well. Chad Rigetti, a great Canadian founder. He's the Canadian founder that started the quantum computing company that raised 120 million. He was a solo founder, and he was a solo founder building a freaking quantum computer, okay? That's not an easy software hack. It's a quantum computer, and you're like, what are you smoking? But he was such a force of spirit when you talk to him that it wasn't a question of if he was going to succeed. It was just a question of whether or not you wanted to jump on his train. And I think when you're an investor, it doesn't matter if you fail generally in Silicon Valley. You only lose 1x your money or 1x your time. The biggest challenge for us is finding things that can actually be 100x or 1000x outcomes. So if you are a sole founder, you just need to amp that up. And then my greed will overcome my fear.
And have good references. Having a strong community of people who vouch for you. I mean, I know when I meet a founder who's solo, my first thought is like, what's wrong? Like, what's wrong? Why has nobody wanted to join this with you? And it's like, either you're not really good at selling, which you can obviously fix with traction, or I don't know, you don't get along with people. Like there's, it could be a personality thing. It could be any number of things. So having someone who can vouch for you and say, no, here's the picture, because we don't have that much time to review you as a founder. I know for us, we operate 2 programs a year and they're each 4 months long. So the time that we have to actually evaluate you is short. And the best thing that we can do is check references and see what other folks have to say about you. And if these are not just random people, but sort of other successful people who can vouch for you, that's really helpful.
I think the only common thing between startups is that they're all different. So everybody comes in, really with a different sort of situation and a unique case. We never, create rules around or templates around, how we select founders or how we look at solo founders, for example. We've accepted a few solo founders in the past. I think the red flag, if a red flag comes up with a solo founder, it's if in the interview process or in the situation or the event that we're getting to know them and doing due diligence with them, we realize that they think they can do it all on their own. I think that's when there's a red flag. I think the case is always unique and they're on their own at that stage for a reason. And then with time, if they realize that they will eventually build a team around them. We actually love those situations because we love helping them build the early blocks of their company very early, and especially help them find early co-founders or help them find people in our community that can actually be their early employees. So.
All right, we're almost out of time. So 30 seconds. If you could meet 3 founders in the next couple of days, what would they look like and where do they find you?
I am looking for, CDL, we've got applications open right now. We look for deep science, proprietary technologies. We like tough tech, bad business plans. That's kind of where we excel in the space that we work with. The way we run our program is not through theoretical learning. You're put right in front of individuals, high net worth, who have built, scaled, and exited companies. They're the ones that mentor you. They're the ones that bring you through the 9-month program, or you get dropped. I'm going to be at the tent where they're holding office hours tomorrow, starting at 1 o'clock, going until 5 o'clock. So I'm happy to meet with anybody as our applications are closing mid-August.
I'll be at the tent tomorrow as well, along with my team. Emily, Rana, Shane, please raise your hands. Come find any of us at any time. We're also going to be running Investor Zone on Thursday. Come talk to any of the TMZ team members. We should be wearing DMZ t-shirts. And also you should find in the Accelerator tent about 8 founders from DMZ that, to everyone's point, it would be great if you talk to them and ask them about their experience.
I too will be at the tent tomorrow. So definitely come find me there. In terms of what we're looking for, so technically all 3 of our programs are kicking off in January, New York, San Francisco, and Toronto, but I'm here in particular sourcing for Toronto programs. So if you're trying to build a company here and you want to build within the US and then raise from investors beyond Canada as well and have clients beyond Canada, I'd love to talk to you. Only true requirement is that you're B2B SaaS, and ideally we'll have a product in market by January. The only other requirement is that you're enjoyable to work with.
We love smart founders going after ambitious markets. So just like Gillian was said, we have a soft spot for deep tech and unsexy businesses. We think the unsexy is really sexy. And ultimately, we're motivated by teams. So you don't need traction. You just need a big vision and a great team. And we'd love to talk to you. And if you have traction, it's also welcome too.
Thanks, guys. Everybody put your hands together.